The charity gala is the kind of event that costs more to host than most people earn in a decade, and Chairman Jiang Sung-il has never once apologized for that. Generosity, he has always said, should be visible. Visible generosity inspires more generosity. The math is simple. Diane heard him say this the first time at a fundraiser in Manhattan 7 years ago, standing beside a man she'd been introduced to as Korea's most important living philanthropist, which she'd assumed was the kind of hyperbole wealthy people's assistants deployed without embarrassment. She'd smiled politely and said something noncommittal about the importance of arts education, which was why she was there. She ran a nonprofit providing music programs to underfunded public schools, and his foundation was one of three she was pitching that evening. He had listened to her for 45 minutes without once looking at his phone. Nobody in that room listened to anyone for 45 minutes, she noticed. 7 years later, she is standing in the ballroom of the Jiang Group's annual charity gala. Seoul, winter. The kind of cold outside that makes the warmth inside feel deliberate. Wearing a dress her husband chose because he said it reminded him of the color of the Manhattan sky the night they met. And she is watching him cross to the podium to give his annual speech. And she is thinking, the way she thinks every year at this moment, that she is the luckiest person in this room. Sung-il at the podium is something to watch, not because he performs well. He doesn't actually, in the technical sense. He's not a practiced public speaker. He reads from notes when he'd rather not need to. He laughs at his own jokes a half-second before anyone else, which should be endearing and somehow is. What makes him worth watching is that he means every word. 7 years of marriage, and Diane has never once caught her husband saying something he doesn't mean. It is the rarest quality she has ever encountered in a person, and she found it in the last place she expected. A Korean billionaire who had been told his whole life that meaning things was a luxury powerful men couldn't afford. There is one person in this room, he says, departing from his notes now, which she can tell because his posture changes slightly, becomes less formal, without whom none of this, not the foundation, not the work, not whatever good we've managed to do in the last 6 years, would exist in the shape it currently exists. She knows what's coming. He does this every year. She has asked him every year to stop, and he has listened to her request thoughtfully and continued doing it anyway. My wife brought life back into my world, he says. I don't know how to say that more simply than that. The room applauds. Diane smiles, the real smile, not the gala smile, the one she reserves for moments when he does something that still, after 7 years, catches her off guard by being exactly what it is. Across the ballroom, Joey watches the entrance. Not the speech, the entrance, and the emergency exit to the left, and the service corridor access point behind the east bar, and the table of Jiang Group board members seated closer to the podium than his current security assessment considers advisable. He has worked for Chairman Jiang for 9 years. He has been chief of security for 4. In that time, he has developed the specific professional relationship of a man who deeply respects his employer and has never once in 9 years fully stopped scanning the room for what might go wrong. Something feels wrong tonight. He can't source it. That's what makes it worse. Nothing specific. No observable threat. No intelligence that's flagged anything concrete. Just the particular, unreliable, professionally inconvenient feeling of a man whose instincts have been calibrated by 9 years of keeping someone alive, and are currently telling him to pay closer attention than the evening seems to require. He speaks quietly into his earpiece. Perimeter status, clear, the response comes. Vehicle status, ready. East exit as arranged. He looks at the chairman, at the man who gave the speech he gives every year about his wife, with the same genuine, slightly embarrassing sincerity he brings to everything. And then at Diane, who is watching her husband the way Diane always watches her husband, like someone who still can't quite believe her luck, 7 years in. Something's wrong, Joey says quietly into the earpiece. Sir, stay alert. The gala ends at 10:15. Standard exit protocol, Joey at point, 2 agents flanking, the chairman and Diane through the east corridor to the waiting vehicle. Clean, practiced, The same sequence they've run at 50 similar events over 4 years. The SUV is 30 feet away when Joey sees the black vehicle, not parked, moving, coming from the north end of the arrival's circle with the specific acceleration of something that has already committed to a direction. Contact, he says into the earpiece. North approach, black vehicle, hostile. The first shot takes out the east agent. Everything happens in the specific compressed chaos of violence. Not slow motion the way people imagine it. Not cinematic, just fast and loud and terrible. The sound of it wrong against the civilized backdrop of a valet stand, and a hotel entrance with its lights still warm and welcoming above them. Joey moves toward the chairman, not away, which is training and also something beyond training. 9 years of something beyond training. He is not fast enough. Sung-il has already turned. Already placed himself between Diane and the direction of the gunfire, which is not instinct for most people, but apparently is for a man who has always, in every context, put himself between the people he loves and the things that might hurt them. The second shot finds him. Joey kills the shooter. The vehicle accelerates and disappears 2 seconds, 3, gone into the soul night with a professional speed that tells him everything about what this was and nothing yet about who ordered it. He is already on the ground beside the chairman. Diane is on his other side, both hands pressed against the wound, her dress dark with it, saying his name in the specific, repeated way of someone refusing to accept what their eyes are telling them. Sung-il looks at Joey. His mouth moves. Joey leans close. 4 words barely sound at all, the last thing Chairman Jiang Sung-il will ever say to the man who has kept him alive for 9 years. Don't trust my family. The next 72 hours happen to Diane rather than with her. She is escorted, interviewed, escorted again. A hospital waiting room she doesn't remember arriving in. A police station she doesn't remember leaving. The Jiang family penthouse, her home for 7 years, suddenly full of people who have never before come without invitation, and are now moving through every room with the specific ownership of people who believe they are reclaiming something. Sung-il's eldest son, Jiang T1, arrives from London within 14 hours. His second son, Jiang T-min, from Singapore within 18. His 2 brothers arrived together, which means they spoke before they arrived, which means they agreed on something before they spoke to Diane, which she registers distantly, through the specific numbness of grief that hasn't yet fully arrived, as information worth keeping. Nobody holds her hand. Nobody asks how she's doing. The first direct conversation she has with any Jiang family member in the 72 hours after her husband's death is with T1, in the study she and Sung-il used to share, surrounded by his books and his notes, and the particular smell of him that she is already, terrifyingly, beginning to not be able to locate precisely. We'll be handling the estate process, T1 says. Our legal team will be in touch about the transition of assets. Transition, Diane says. The company, obviously, reverts to family governance. Father's personal accounts will be subject to the standard review period before any dispersal, T1. Your father just died. I'm aware, he says. His voice is not warm. It was not warm before any of this. It has been specifically, carefully not warm toward Diane for the entirety of the 7 years she has been married to his father. I'm also aware that you have significant financial interest in the outcome of the estate review, and I think we both understand that. I think, Diane says very quietly, that you should leave this room. He leaves. She sits in the study for a long time after, surrounded by the books and the smell and the specific silence of a life that has just been removed from her without warning, and she does not cry. Not yet. She can't yet. The grief is too large to fit into something as small as tears, and she thinks about 4 words whispered by a dying man. Don't trust my family. She didn't need to be told, but she thinks about the fact that he said it anyway. That of everything he could have spent his last 4 words on, he spent them on a warning. She thinks about what he knew at the end that she still doesn't. Joey appears in the doorway at 11 p.m. She hasn't seen him since the hospital. He has been somewhere in the background of the past 72 hours, present in the way he is always present, which is to say efficiently and without announcement. He looks exactly as he always looks, which she finds irrationally, briefly enraging. She is destroyed and he is composed, and she knows intellectually that his composure is what the situation requires, and also she resents it completely. "Ma'am," he says. "Don't," she says. He pauses. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Don't call me that tonight. I can't." She stops, pulls herself back into something functional. "I'm sorry. That's not no," he says. "You're right." But he doesn't finish the sentence, and he doesn't call her by her name, and he stands in the doorway with his hands loose at his sides and the specific careful distance of a man who has drawn a line and is determined to hold it. "The family," she says. "His brothers want me out of the penthouse by the end of the week. I know. Is that legal? Our legal team is reviewing it." A pause. "You have rights under the marriage contract. They know that. They're testing what you'll accept." She looks at him. "And you? What are you doing here? Your employer is dead." Something moves through his expression, not much, just a fraction, the specific economy of a man who doesn't spend emotion visibly. "He gave me an order," Joey says. "Before he died." She already knows, somehow, what the order was. "To protect me," she says. "Yes, ma'am." She looks at the books on the shelves, at her husband's handwriting on a notepad still open on the desk. A grocery list of all things, written 3 days before he died, mundane and specific and completely irreplaceable. "Okay," she says. "Okay, stay," she says. "Whatever the family says. Whatever happens with the estate. Stay." Joey looks at her for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," he says. Welcome to Real Soul Stories. If you're enjoying where this story is heading, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching us from. This story is special. Let's get back to it. The first article appears on a Tuesday. Not a reputable outlet. A gossip site with significant traffic and zero editorial standards. The kind of publication that has always existed at the edges of Seoul's media ecosystem. Trafficking in insinuation dressed as curiosity. The headline reads, "Jeong Sung-il's American Wife. Love Story or Long Con." Diane reads it once, standing at the kitchen counter of the penthouse at 6 in the morning, and then she sets her phone face down and makes coffee and stands at the window watching Seoul wake up and thinks about the specific, terrible efficiency of a narrative that writes itself. Young. American. Black. Second wife. Significantly younger than her husband. Married him within 2 years of meeting him. No prenuptial agreement, which the article presents as suspicious rather than as evidence of a man who trusted his wife completely, which is what it actually was. The article doesn't say gold digger. It doesn't need to. It constructs a portrait and lets the reader supply the word. By Thursday there are 11 more. By the following Monday, her face is on 3 television news programs simultaneously, each of them running the same gala footage. Sung-il at the podium, the applause, his hand finding hers in the crowd, and asking, in the careful language of people who have learned to imply without asserting, whether the public display of affection was genuine or performed. She stops watching the news. She doesn't stop reading the comments, which is a form of self-destruction she recognizes and cannot entirely make herself stop. The comments are worse than the articles because they are unfiltered. The specific cruelty of people who have decided a woman's grief is suspicious, and her love was transactional, and her presence in a dead man's life was an intrusion rather than a marriage. Gold digger always knew she'd outlive him. Convenient that she was right there when it happened. Bet she hired them herself. She closes the phone. Joey is in the doorway. She hasn't heard him arrive, which she has begun to accept is simply how he exists in a space, present without announcement. "How long have you been there?" she asks. "Long enough," he says. She looks at him. "Did you read them?" "Yes." And his expression doesn't change. People say things when they haven't been given the truth yet. "The truth is that my husband is dead and they're deciding I probably killed him." "Yes," he says. "That's what they're saying." He doesn't offer reassurance beyond this. Doesn't tell her it'll pass, or that people will come around, or any of the comfortable things people say when the uncomfortable thing is simply true. "Is there anything you need this morning?" She looks at him for a long moment, at this man who has been in her home for 7 years as a professional presence, familiar and entirely opaque, and whom she is now realizing she knows almost nothing about beyond what his job requires him to be. "No," she says. "Thank you." He nods. returns to wherever he was before. The Jiang family moves on 3 fronts simultaneously, which tells Diane they planned this before Sung-il was buried, possibly before he died, which is a thought she files carefully alongside everything else she is filing. Front 1. The estate. Their legal team files a motion challenging the terms of Sung-il's most recent will, the one signed 18 months ago, which Diane knows about because she was present when he signed it, with 2 witnesses and a notary, and the specific deliberate formality of a man who wanted it to be unambiguous. The challenge is thin, their lawyer told her this immediately. It's a harassment strategy, not a real legal argument, but it freezes asset access during review, which means Diane cannot access the joint accounts, the foundation funds, or the personal savings Sung-il maintained separately from the corporate holdings. She is, within 2 weeks of her husband's death, functionally financially frozen. Front 2. The penthouse. The building's management, a subsidiary of Jiang Group, she has always known this, has never before had reason to care, sends a formal notice that the lease arrangement for the penthouse requires review given the change in circumstances. It is not an eviction notice. It is the thing you send before an eviction notice when you want to see if the person will leave voluntarily before you have to make it official. She does not leave voluntarily. Front 3. The board. The Jiang Group Board of Directors, at an emergency session she is not invited to, votes to appoint T1 as interim chairman pending the estate review. This is legal, she checked, immediately with the company's own charter documents, and also devastating, because it removes the last institutional protection Sung-il built for her within his own company. T1 calls her the day after the board vote. "I want you to know this isn't personal," he says. "It's extraordinarily personal," Diane says. "The company needs stable leadership during the mourning period. Father would have understood. Your father," Diane says, "would have understood that you moved faster than the body was cold." T1 is quiet for a moment. "I'm going to suggest, for both our sakes, that we keep these conversations professional. Call me again about anything other than the legal process," Diane says, "and I'll ask my lawyer to handle all future contact." She hangs up. Joey from the doorway, always the doorway. She's beginning to think of the doorway as his natural habitat, says nothing. "Say something," she tells him. "You handled that correctly," he says. "That's not what I meant, I know," he says. "I don't have anything else yet. The threats begin in week 3, not from the family or not from them directly. Anonymous. A letter slipped under the penthouse door that security should have caught and didn't, which is itself information Joey treats with visible, controlled alarm. Someone had access to this floor, he tells her, his voice flat and professional. "That shouldn't be possible. What does the letter say?" He shows her. "Go back to America before they make you." She reads it twice. Sets it down. "Is this the family? I don't know yet. The sons, the brothers, possibly." He picks the letter up, handles it with the careful attention of someone who knows it needs to be preserved, or someone who wants it to look like the family. "Those are very different things." "Yes," he says, "they are." The second threat comes 4 days later, a phone call to her personal number, which means someone with access to information they shouldn't have. A voice she doesn't recognize, flat and brief. "You were warned," she tells Joey immediately. He has already, she discovers, been doing something about it. She finds this out not because he tells her, but because she overhears a conversation with his contact at a private investigations firm. And when she confronts him about it, he neither apologizes nor explains himself further than, "I'm doing my job, ma'am. Your job was to protect my husband. My job," he says carefully, "is whatever he needed it to be. He told me to protect you, so I'm protecting you." She looks at him. "You could have found other work by now. Better paying. Less complicated." "Yes," he says. "Why haven't you?" He looks at her with the specific blankness of a man declining to answer a question he has clearly heard. "Is there anything you need this afternoon?" An answer. "Anything else?" She exhales. "No." The formal condolence call from T-Min, the second son, whom she has always found marginally easier to read than T1, comes at the end of week 3, and it is one of the stranger conversations she has in this period. He comes to the penthouse rather than calling. Sits across from her in the living room with the careful posture of a man managing something. Accepts coffee. makes the appropriate grieving son gestures, and then you should consider the family's offer. What offer? There's going to be a settlement proposed, he says. A significant one. Clean break, the estate review drops, the legal challenges stop. You receive a substantial financial package and full rights to any personal property, and I leave. And you rebuild your life, he says, which is a careful way of saying the same thing. Timin, she says. Your father told me something before he died. Something moves through his expression, brief, quickly managed. What did he say? She looks at him steadily. He said he loved me. It's not what Sungil said. She watches Timin's face as she says it, the specific, almost imperceptible relaxation of someone who braced for one answer and received another. He braced for something. Of course he did, Timin says. After he leaves, she sits with what she saw in his face and thinks about it for a long time. Joey finds her, late that night, in Sungil's study. She has been in there more than anywhere else in the apartment, which she understands is a form of staying close to something she can't keep. She is sitting on the floor, not the chair, the floor, her back against the bookshelf, surrounded by the specific geography of a dead man's reading habits. Joey stops in the doorway. You can come in, she says. It's not, I'm not having a moment, I'm thinking. He comes in. Sits on the chair across from her, the floor being apparently a level of informality he hasn't arrived at yet. Forearms on his knees, hands loose, the watchful stillness she has learned is simply how he occupies space. He trusted you completely, she says. Not a question, yes, what was he like with you? Not the public version. Joey is quiet for a moment. Direct, he says finally. He said what he meant. Most powerful people, they manage information. They give you what they want you to have. He didn't do that. If he thought something, he said it. He was like that with me too, she says. I know, what else? He read everything, Joey says, looking at the shelves around them. He'd have a book in his jacket pocket at every event. Security briefings he'd read twice because he said the second read always surfaced something he missed. A pause. He asked about my family. Every year at the company holiday dinner, not the polite version of asking, the real version. He remembered answers. She looks at him. He told me once that you were the most competent person he'd ever employed and also the most difficult to get to know. Joey almost smiles. That sounds like him. Is it true? Probably both parts, he says. She turns a book over in her hands, one of Sungil's. A history of Korean modernization. She's read the first chapter of 6 times without getting further because something always interrupted. The things Timin didn't say tonight were more interesting than the things he did. Tell me. She describes the conversation, the offer. The moment his face moved when she said he told me something before he died. Joey listens without interrupting, the specific, focused attention of someone filing everything. He was afraid of what Sungil told you, Joey says, yes, which means he knows what Sungil might have told you, which means he knows more than he's showing, Joey says. About that night, the study is very quiet. Outside, Seoul does its late-night thing, the city in its lower register, reduced but never fully still. Someone is going to try again, Diane says. Not a question. The specific, calm statement of someone who has been thinking about this for 3 weeks and has arrived at an answer she doesn't want but recognizes as true. They didn't get what they wanted at the gala. The mastermind got away. And I'm still here. Yes, Joey says. So what do we do? He looks at her. The first time she realizes that he has looked at her directly for longer than a brief exchange requires. We find out who it was, he says. Before they try again, together, a pause, together. The brake failure happens on a Thursday morning. Deanne's car, a vehicle Joey has checked personally every morning since the second week, a habit he established without being asked and without announcing, is taken for service by a junior member of the security team while Joey is in a meeting with the private investigator he's retained. Standard rotation. The kind of task that has happened dozens of times without incident. The junior agent brings the car around at 9 a.m. Diane is scheduled for a meeting with her attorney in Gangnam. She gets in. Joey gets in the passenger seat. They are 3 blocks from the building when he notices it, not the brake failure itself that comes later, on the descent toward an intersection. What he notices first is the feel of the car, something fractionally wrong in the way it responds, a quality of weight distribution that doesn't match the vehicle he drove yesterday, which he drove because he drives every vehicle Diane uses before she uses it. Stop, he says. What? Stop the car. The driver applies the brakes. They don't catch. The intersection is 40 meters ahead, 4 lanes of moving traffic, a delivery truck crossing left to right, the specific arithmetic of a collision that would be severe and possibly unsurvivable. Joey takes the wheel. He does not fight the momentum. There isn't enough road for that, not with no functional brakes and 40 meters of descent. He steers instead, hard left, into the emergency stopping lane that exists on this particular block because this particular block has a significant grade. A detail he knows because he has mapped every route Diane uses and knows every feature of every route. The car scrapes the barrier. Stops. Nobody is hurt. Joey gets out. Looks at Diane through the window. She is pale, her hands flat on her knees, breathing in the specific controlled way of someone managing shock with whatever discipline they have available. He opens her door. Ma'am, I'm fine, she says. Her voice is steady. How did you know the car felt wrong? The car felt wrong, she repeats. That's all, that's all. She looks at the barrier. At the intersection beyond it, still moving, the city entirely unbothered by what just nearly happened. If you hadn't been in the car, I was in the car, he says. But if you hadn't been, Diane, he says, and it's the first time she realizes immediately that he has used her name. Just her name, no ma'am, no Mrs. Jiang, just Diane. He says it like he didn't mean to and is not going to address having said it. I was in the car. We're fine. Let me call the investigator. She watches him make the call, standing at the side of the road in the November morning, and she thinks. He said my name. She doesn't say anything about it. The investigation into the brake failure takes 4 days and confirms what Joey already suspected. The brake line was cut. Not catastrophically, precisely, in a way designed to fail at a specific level of hydraulic pressure, which means at a specific speed, which means on a specific grade. This was not improvised. Someone knew her route. Someone knew the vehicle. Someone had access to the building's secured parking level. The building has 14 access points, Joey tells her, spreading a layout across the dining table that evening. 11 are camera covered. 3 have gaps: maintenance corridor, service elevator shaft, and the east stairwell, which has been under camera repair for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Diane says. Since before Sung-il died. Yes, that's not a coincidence. No, Joey says. It isn't. He points to the service elevator. The brake line was accessed here. Whoever did it knew about the camera gap, which means someone who knew about the building's security architecture, or someone who was given that information. She looks at him. Someone inside the security team, possibly. Your team. I've been considering that, he says, with the specific flatness of someone discussing a possibility that has clearly cost him something to consider. The junior agent who took the car for service, I don't believe he's involved. I've known him 3 years, but someone knew the rotation schedule. Someone knew when the car would be unattended and which agent would be handling it. How many people know the rotation schedule within the security team? 4. Outside it, he pauses. It was shared with the Jiang family's estate management office 2 weeks ago. Standard procedure during the transition of household oversight. Who requested it? He looks at her steadily. T1's office. The apartment fire happens 11 days later. Not the penthouse, Diane's secondary apartment. The one she maintained independently throughout her marriage because Sung-il, who understood her completely, understood that she needed a space that was entirely hers. A small place in Mapo, unpretentious, full of books she bought before she was a Jiang wife and plants that don't know they belong to a billionaire's widow. She isn't there when it starts. She and Joey are at her attorney's office for a 3-hour document review that has been rescheduled twice, finally locked in that morning. The building superintendent calls her at 2 p.m. She listens. Thanks him. Hangs up. Joey is watching her from across the conference table. My apartment, she says. Fire. They're saying electrical fault. Is it salvageable? 3rd floor. Mostly contained to my unit. She sets her phone down. Everything I had there that was mine before Sung-il, before the marriage, is gone. Joey doesn't offer condolences. He does something more useful. He picks up his own phone and calls his investigator immediately, asking for someone at the scene before the fire department files its report. The investigator's findings come back within 48 hours. Not electrical fault. A device placed in the building's electrical panel on the second floor designed to ignite at a specific current load. Sophisticated, clean. The kind of work that costs money and requires access. 2 attempts in 11 days, Joey says that evening. Break failure and a fire. The fire was at your secondary apartment, which the family may not have known you weren't using regularly. They thought I'd be there, or they were sending a message regardless. What message? That they can reach you anywhere. He looks at her. Which means you can't stay here either. If they have access to building security, where do I go? He has, she discovers, already solved this. A property not connected to the Jiang Group, not in her name, not in any record accessible to anyone currently trying to locate her. He won't tell her whose name it's in. She suspects it's his. She doesn't ask. They move that night. The new place is a mid-rise apartment in a neighborhood neither of them has any documented connection to, furnished in the spare, functional way of somewhere bought for purpose rather than comfort. 2 bedrooms, a workspace, a kitchen that works. Joey does a sweep when they arrive. Checks windows, checks the building's entry points. Checks things she has stopped trying to identify because she doesn't have the vocabulary for what he's looking for. She unpacks what she has, which is not much. She's been traveling light since the gala, out of instinct or premonition. She's not sure which. She stands in the kitchen at 11 p.m. making tea. She doesn't particularly want and thinking about a grocery list in her dead husband's handwriting. And the fact that there are now 2 documented attempts on her life, and the family that should be grieving alongside her is instead doing everything in its considerable power to erase her. I'm sorry about your things, Joey says from the doorway. She looks up. What things? The apartment. The things you had before all of this. He is holding a file, the investigator's report, she assumes, something he's been reviewing. People think the danger is the physical threat. But losing the things that made you yourself, that's a different kind of damage. She stares at him. What? He says. You've never said anything like that before. He looks at the file. I've been thinking about it since the call. You think about things you don't say, most things, he agrees. She wraps both hands around her mug. Why? Because most things aren't useful to say. Is that one useful? He looks at her. Probably not. I'm sorry, don't be, she says. It was thank you. It was the right thing. She pauses. Sungil said that about you once. That you think about everything twice before you say it and then you say half of it. Something crosses his face, brief. The specific brevity of a man who rarely lets anything show and is therefore especially visible on the rare occasions he does. That sounds like him. He meant it as a compliment. I know, Joey says. He told me. The investigation becomes, over the following 2 weeks, the structure around which their days organize themselves. Joey's investigator, a former prosecutor named Han Soo-bin, who left the public sector for reasons she describes as institutional frustration, and which Joey has told Diane means she was too good at finding things people didn't want found, works the corporate side. Financial records, board communications, the specific archaeology of a company whose chairman died violently and whose internal documents are now scattered across a dozen jurisdictions and 3 legal holds. Diane works the personal side. She knows things about Sungil's life that no investigator could access. The names of the people he trusted quietly, the specific shorthand of his notes, the difference between what he wrote formally and what he wrote when he was thinking something through alone. She sits for hours with his journals. She knew about them. He never hid them. She had simply never needed to read them before, and she builds a picture of the last 18 months of her husband's life that she is only now, in retrospect, able to see correctly. He was afraid. Not obviously, Sungil was not an obvious man. But the journals show a pattern. Meetings he documented but didn't digitize. A company account he flagged internally without escalating to the board. A specific security concern he raised with Joey 8 months before the gala that Joey, when she reads him the passage, confirms he took seriously at the time and followed up on and was told was resolved. Who told you it was resolved? She asks. Joey is quiet for a moment. T1, he says. He said the matter had been reviewed internally and didn't require external involvement. And you accepted that. I escalated again 2 weeks later, Joey says. Same answer. I should have pushed harder. You did what you could with what you were given. It wasn't enough. She looks at him at the specific, contained self-punishment of a man who has been carrying the weight of one insufficient moment for 2 months. Joey, she says, he trusted you completely. He told me that. Not just as an employee, he said you were one of 3 people in his life he trusted without reservation. It didn't keep him alive, no, she says. It didn't. But it wasn't your failure that killed him. Someone else made that choice. She holds his gaze. We're going to find out who. He looks at her for a moment, the specific, long look of someone deciding how much to allow through. Yes, he says. We are. Han Subin calls on a Tuesday with the first significant finding. The missing company money, she says, when Diane and Joey are both on the line. 18 months of irregular transfers, small enough individually to stay below automatic flagging, large enough in aggregate to be significant. They flow through 3 shell accounts before disappearing into a 4th account I can't trace from here. I need a financial forensics contact with clearance I don't have. How much total? Joey asks. Roughly 14 billion won, she says. Over 18 months. Diane does the math. That's not embezzlement. That's a war chest. Someone was funding something, Subin agrees. The transfers start 18 months ago. That's 8 months before Sungil flagged the security concern, Joey says, so he noticed the money first, Diane says, and then raised the security concern, and was told twice it was resolved by the person whose office had access to the building security layout, Joey says. They sit with that for a moment. One more thing, Subin says. The security footage from the night of the gala. The cameras covering the north approach, where the vehicle came from. The footage from 30 minutes before the attack and 20 minutes after exists cleanly. The 6 minutes immediately surrounding the attack are missing. Not corrupted, deleted. Professionally. Someone with system access, Joey says. Someone who knew exactly which files to pull, Subin says. Send me everything you have, Joey tells her. And the financial forensics contact, I have someone. He hangs up, looks at Diane. T1, she says. That's where the evidence points, he says carefully. We don't have enough yet, but it points there, yes. She thinks about the board meeting she wasn't invited to. About the estate challenge filed before her husband was buried. About don't trust my family and a man who knew at the end exactly what was coming and spent his last 4 words making sure she'd been warned. He knew, she says. Sungil knew it was T1. Probably not the full shape of it, Joey says. But he suspected. That's why he escalated through me rather than the board. He didn't trust the internal channels, because the internal channels led back to T1. Yes, she stands. Goes to the window, the new apartment's view, which is considerably less grand than the penthouse in which she prefers inexplicably for reasons she hasn't examined. He was protecting me even then, she says. 8 months before he died. Raising security concerns. Telling you to watch more carefully. He was building something that would keep me safer without telling me why, because telling me would have frightened me. That's my read of it, Joey says. He was always doing that, she says. Standing between me and things, even things he couldn't name yet. She turns. I am going to find the proof. Whatever it takes. Joey looks at her, the long look, the one she's seen twice before and still can't fully interpret. I know, he says. I'm going to help you. The poison drink happens at a charity foundation board meeting. Not Sungil's foundation, Diane's own. The music education nonprofit she ran before she was a Jiang wife, and continued running throughout the marriage. The one thing she maintained entirely separately from her husband's world, staffed by people who knew her before she knew what a Jiang group board room looked like. She attends the monthly meeting because not attending feels like surrendering something she isn't willing to surrender, the specific, important piece of herself that existed before all of this, and has no intention of being consumed by it. Joey accompanies her, sits near the back of the small conference room, does what he always does in rooms where his presence isn't strictly necessary, watches everything. The drinks are set out before the meeting: water, coffee, a tray of teas prepared by the foundation's office manager, a woman named Clara who has worked for Diane for 6 years and whose loyalty is, as far as Diane can determine, completely genuine. Clara didn't prepare all the drinks herself. A temporary catering assistant, hired through an agency that Subin will later confirm received an anonymous referral 3 days before the meeting, handled the tea tray. Diane reaches for a cup. Joey's hand closes around her wrist before she lifts it, not hard. Just there. Certain, she looks at him. He looks at the cup. Switch with me, he says quietly, already moving, trading her cup for the water glass he's been holding, sliding the tea tray slightly out of her reach with his other hand in a motion so subtle nobody at the table notices it. What later, he says. She drinks the water. The meeting continues. The tea is tested by Subin's contact at a private laboratory within 24 hours. Aconite wolfsbane, Subin explains, on a call that Diane takes sitting on the floor of the new apartment's second bedroom, her back against the wall, because she needed a wall behind her when she made this call, and she's not sure she knew why until this moment. Naturally derived, difficult to trace in a standard toxicology screen, historically used precisely because the symptoms can resemble cardiac events in someone with no prior medical history of poisoning. A cardiac event, Diane says. Like a grieving widow who's been under significant stress, exactly like that. How much was in the cup? A pause. Enough. She closes her eyes, opens them. Joey noticed, she says. Your instincts are good too, Subin says. You've been trusting them correctly throughout this. Don't stop. How did he know? Ask him, Subin says. He'll have an answer. He always has an answer. She asks him that evening. He is in the kitchen making coffee, which she has noticed he does at approximately 9 p.m. every night, a habit as reliable as everything else about him. She sits at the counter. How did you know? She says. The catering assistant, he says. I didn't recognize her from the regular agency rotation. And she refilled the water glasses herself but asked Clara to handle the coffee, which is an odd distinction if you're just doing your job. That's all. She avoided my eyeline, he says. 3 times when I looked directly at her. People who are doing nothing wrong don't consistently avoid the eyes of the security personnel in a room. You were watching her the entire meeting. I was watching everything the entire meeting. But you noticed her specifically, yes. She looks at him, at this man who noticed a catering assistant's eyeline and a cup of tea and her wrist in one motion. All of it in the time it takes most people to decide whether they want sugar. Thank you, she says. Don't say it's your job, she says, please. Just let me say thank you without you making it smaller than it is. He looks at her, sets down his coffee. You're welcome, he says. It's the first time he said that instead of the deflection, and she notices. 2 days later, Han Subin comes to the apartment in person. She is a small woman in her late 40s with the specific, contained energy of someone who has been angry about something for a very long time and has learned to make the anger useful. She spreads documents across the dining table and talks for 90 minutes without pausing significantly. The picture that emerges is this. 18 months ago, Jiang T1, operating through a subsidiary he controls personally, separate from the main Jiang Group structure, began moving company funds through the shell account network Subin identified. The funds were used, in part, to retain a private security consulting firm with documented connections to organized crime. The consulting firm's operational records, obtained through a contact of Subin's that neither she nor Joey elaborates on, show a project log for a client identified only by a numerical code. The project log contains 3 phases. Phase 1, surveillance of the primary target and his household. Dated 14 months ago. Phase 2, threat assessment and delivery. Dated 6 months ago, corresponding exactly to the period when Sung-il raised his security concern through Joey. Phase 3, execution. Dated to the week of the gala. The execution phase, Subin says, was supposed to be a warning. The brief specified the primary target should be frightened, not killed. The vehicle and the gunfire were designed to appear more serious than they were, close enough to send a message, controlled enough to miss. It wasn't controlled enough, Joey says. His voice carries nothing, which is worse than carrying something. The driver deviated from the specified approach vector, Subin says carefully. Whether that was incompetence or a separate decision someone made, I can't determine yet. But the brief T1 signed off on was not an assassination order. She pauses. It was a scare campaign that went wrong. The room is very quiet. He didn't mean to kill his father, Diane says. That's what the documents suggest. But he did. Yes. And then he spent 2 months trying to kill me, Diane says, because I was a loose end who might eventually find out what he'd done. That's the logical conclusion, Subin says. And the subsequent attempts, the break failure, the fire, the poison, those are different in character from the gala. More direct, more personal. Someone making individual decisions rather than running a managed operation. He panicked, Joey says, yes. Subin looks at him, which makes him more dangerous in some ways, not less. Panic people make faster decisions with less planning. What do we need, Diane asks, to prove this? To take it somewhere that does something. The financial forensics are close, Subin says. 2, maybe 3 more weeks. But I need the project log authenticated. I need a chain of custody that will hold in court, and right now it has gaps. What kind of gaps? The acquisition of the document wasn't entirely conventional. Define conventional. Subin and Joey exchange a look. We'll work on the authentication, Joey says. What aren't you telling me? Diane asks. Things that are better for you not to know yet, Joey says. For legal reasons, she wants to push. She doesn't because she's been learning over the past weeks the specific trust of someone who has realized that the person across from her is competent in ways she isn't, in domains she doesn't fully understand, and that deferring on those things isn't weakness, it's honesty about where her expertise ends. 2 weeks, she says. Maybe 3, Subin says. 2, Diane says firmly. He's already tried 4 times. I'd like to not give him a 5th opportunity. The crack happens on a Thursday. Not dramatically, nothing between them has ever happened dramatically, which she has come to understand is simply how they operate, both of them. The specific register of 2 people who have learned to hold a great deal quietly. She is in Sungil's study. The documents she's had transferred from the penthouse, the journals, the notes, and she is reading a letter he wrote and never sent, addressed to T1, dated 8 months before the gala. The letter is about her. Not about the company, not about the security concern, not about the money. About her, about who she is, about the specific, precise love of a father trying to explain to his son why the woman he's resented for 7 years deserves better than his resentment. About what she was before him and what she became and what she gave up and what she chose and why those choices mattered. She reads it 3 times. She is on the 3rd reading when she understands, fully and finally, that he knew T1 was planning something. That he wrote this letter not as an explanation but as a preemptive defense, building a record, in his own handwriting, of who she was, so that when the time came, there would be something that said clearly, "This woman is not what my family has decided she is." He was protecting her from beyond the gala, from beyond his own death. She puts the letter down. She does not cry. She has not cried, not once, since the night of the gala, the grief too large and the necessity of functioning too immediate for tears to find their way through. The crying comes now, not because she chose it. Because the letter removed the last wall she'd been maintaining between the immediate crisis and the actual loss underneath it. And without that wall, she is simply a woman whose husband is dead and who loved him completely and who is only now, in a study surrounded by his books and his handwriting, allowing herself to know that in the full, unmanaged way of real grief. Joey finds her 20 minutes later. He appears in the doorway, always the doorway, and he takes in the scene in the specific, rapid way he takes in everything. The letter on the desk, the journals around her, the posture of a woman who has been holding something enormous for 2 months and has just put it down. He does not ask if she's okay. He does not offer the practiced comfort of someone managing a difficult moment. He crosses the room, stands beside her, removes his jacket, he places it over her shoulders. It's warm, body warm, the specific warmth of something that has been worn rather than stored, and it smells like him, which she notices without meaning to and then cannot stop noticing. He doesn't hug her, doesn't touch her beyond the jacket settling around her shoulders, steps back to where he was close but not crossing the line he has maintained for months, that careful, deliberate distance. "I'm sorry," he says quietly, "that no one believes you." She looks up at him. His face is the most open she has ever seen it, not unguarded exactly, because Joey is never fully unguarded but chosen the specific choice to let something show that he normally keeps where she can't see it. "He wrote me a letter," she says. "He never sent it. It was to T1 defending me, explaining who I am. He wrote it 8 months ago. He was always doing that," Joey says, quietly. "Building things for you before you knew you'd need them. You knew about this, not this specifically." But he looks at the shelves, at the books, at the study. He asked me once about 6 months before the gala what I thought of you. Not as a security concern. As a person, she stares at him. What did you say? That I thought you were the most honest person in any room you walked into, he says. And that most people didn't deserve that quality in someone, and I hoped he understood how rare it was. Joey, he said he did, he says. He said he'd known it since the first night he met you. She is quiet for a long time. Why didn't you ever? You've always been so distant, she says. I thought you disliked me. No, he says. Then what? He looks at her directly. You were his, he says. And he was the only person I've ever worked for whose judgment I trusted completely. Respecting you meant maintaining a distance that was appropriate to what you were to each other. And now, he doesn't answer immediately. Now, he says, finally, you're in danger. And he asked me to protect you. And respecting what he asked of me means he starts differently. The distance is still appropriate. The reasons are just different now. She holds his gaze. What are the reasons now? We're in the middle of something, he says. When it's finished, when you're safe and the truth is out and you've had time to be whoever you are after all of this, then it might be worth asking that question again. It's not a declaration. It's the most honest thing he said to her in months. The specific honesty of a man who has decided she deserves the truth even when the truth is not yet. She pulls his jacket closer around her shoulders. Okay, she says. Okay, when it's finished, she says. I'll ask again. He looks at her the long look, and this time she can read it fully, finally. Not distance, not professional containment, but the specific restraint of a man who is choosing to hold something because the moment isn't right, not because the thing isn't real. Good, he says. He stays in the study until she's ready to leave it. He doesn't take the jacket back. This is where this part ends. Part 2 drops soon. Thank you, loves, for tuning in to Real Soul Stories. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you think Part 2 will be headed. See you guys on the next video.